special meeting of the Hartford Board of Education to order. Ms. Santiago, could you take the roll? Here. Here.
Here. Here. Here.
Here.
McCauley.
Here.
Here.
Thank you, Ms. Santiago. Business agenda, item 3.1, second reading and adoption, school calendar for 2015-2016. That the Hartford Board of Education accepts the second reading and adopts the proposed 2015-2016 school calendar. Is there a motion? It's been moved by the mayor. Is there a second?
Second.
And seconded by Dr. Colon-Rivas. Dr. Narvaez?
Yes, thank you, board members. I'm recommending that you accept the second reading of the proposed 2015-2016 school calendar. At our March 17th meeting, you asked us to come back and reflect Veterans Day as a district holiday on the calendar for next year. I'm pleased to announce that we have done that. Wednesday, November 11th, 2015 will be observed as a district holiday in honor of our veterans and all the men and women who currently serve and sacrifice for our country. We still believe it's important that we develop a robust plan that will allow us to remember, honor, and celebrate the sacrifices of our veterans through engaging each other and our students in deeper learning. And as usual, the proposed calendar specifies our early start dates, professional development sessions, and holidays. And I now ask that you accept the second reading and adopt the proposed 2015-2016 school calendar before you.
Thank you. Is there debate? Are there questions, first of all? No questions. Is there debate on the motion? Nobody wants to debate the motion this time around.
We did what you asked us to do.
Okay. Oh, so I thought someone might want to give a speech, but okay. Before the chair calls the question, the chair would like to thank our two student members, Mr. Noel Sullivan and Mr. Fatou, because they really did a great job of driving on this issue. They asked tough questions. They debated very, very well, and they take a large share of the credit for the reason why that this is back up and looking the way it looks. And it was really great to see them step up and really do a great job and really pull their weight as part of the sport. So the chair wanted to thank them for that. If there's nothing else, the chair will call the question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any against? The motion carries. Item 3A2, actually 3.2. Approval of the Memorandum of Understanding, our piece of the pie. The resolution is that the Hartford Board of Education authorizes the superintendent to enter into a Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU, with our piece of the pie to allow overage undercredited students to enroll in the Opportunity Academy. The MOU has a 5-year term with a tuition of $8,800 per student for a maximum of 150 students for FY 15-16. Tuition in the future year shall be $8,800 per student, or the SBB rate, whichever is greater. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution? It's been moved by Dr. Colon-Rivas. Is there a second? It's been seconded by Mr. Poland. Dr. Narvaez.
Thank you. Hartford Public Schools opened Opportunity High School in 2009 in partnership with Our Piece of the Pie, one of the nation's leading youth development agencies. And the school was specifically designed to help students who are at risk of dropping out earn a diploma. The school was created to serve the specific needs of overaged and undercredited students who want an accelerated and rigorous program. And the goal of the program is to help students attain the credits needed to graduate in 2.5 years by providing individualized support and services. Under the terms of the partnership, Hartford Public Schools provided Opportunity High School's academic program, and Our Piece of the Pie provided specialized wraparound services, including youth development, employment training, and college readiness services. Our agreement with Our Piece of the Pie is due to expire on June 30th, 2015, with the understanding that OPP would replace Opportunity High School with a magnet school. The partnership has been successful. However, the Opportunity High School model is not economically sustainable in its existing form. In fact, the combined cost for running the school is nearly $30,000 per pupil. As the state is not increasing magnet seats, the OPP magnet was tabled for the 2015-2016 school year. And since the magnet will not be created this year, OPP has agreed, though, to operate a new academy for Hartford students. And we believe this is a natural step in the evolution of this model. The new academy, which will be located at 20 to 28 Sargent Street, will provide the necessary services, including the following: an educational program that combines youth development, workforce development, and college post-secondary readiness services, a high-quality instructional program that meets or exceeds state and Hartford Public Schools standards, including services for English language learners and students with special needs, at least one cycle of youth business and/or youth employment. I'll get quarterly performance reports for all students, and then an individual development plan that offers an assortment of support services based on each student's needs. I see we have Bob Rath and Chris Leone and members of their team from Our Piece of the Pie here as well. If you have any questions about this new proposal in front of you.
Also,
All set.
questions for Dr. Narvaez before we debate the motion? No questions. Is there any debate on the motion? Chair hears no debate. Call the question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any against? Mr. Cotto votes no. The motion carries. Now we're moving out of business into the workshop session, which is the presentation and review of the recommended budget. Dr. Narvaez.
Yes, thank you. I either need somebody to click for me or to give me the clicker to move the, if you want to click, just leave. That's great. Thanks. Okay, so this evening, it's our budget workshop. It is the first in a series of meetings dedicated to reviewing our budget. Tonight, I will give you an overview and share the highlights of the budget with you, and we're going to give you the detailed budget book to walk away from this evening, and we'll provide a series of sessions and workshops for you to dig into the detail of the budget through our finance committee over the next few weeks. So you'll have lots of time again to learn the details and to ask questions. We also would encourage you, if you have questions, if you are going through the book and you have some questions, please submit them to us and we'll keep a running list and provide answers that way. In addition, we'll be holding our public hearing on April 21st, so we'll be able to hear from and get input from the public on the budget, and then the budget will come up for adoption on May 5th for the board. So that's just the scheme of the next few weeks in terms of the budget process, and tonight an overview. So first, our presentation agenda. I'm going to tie all of this back to the transition report themes and tell the story of us. And then I want to talk about some accomplishments, our story of action, the story of now, where we find ourselves now as a school system and how the budget is impacting the story of now. Our strategic focal points, how we've refocused our priorities, our budget process. I'll go through highlights of the budget, the proposed budget. I'll talk about our gap mitigation strategies, and then how we're investing in the future. So that's the agenda for tonight. So first, as you know, it's been a year of transition. I spent my first few months on the job listening and engaging with our community. I continue to do that. And in the course of the transition, gathering data for the transition report, we engaged with 1,700 stakeholders across our community and heard these 6 cross-cutting themes. So first, the overwhelming belief and vision that our system needs to be one of educational equity and excellence, that no matter where you go to school in Hartford, that a child will get a high quality educational experience. Hand in hand with that theme is the urgency to improve our neighborhood schools, but also overall performance. So attending to gaps both within and across schools. The next 4 are really the how. People want to be part of this work, and we know it takes a village. So how we meaningfully engage people, communicate with them, and continue to build relationships will be essential to our success as a system moving forward. Central office transformation was another key theme we heard, saying we exist to serve and support schools. It's our job to help build capacity of school-based leaders. They in turn build the capacity of their teachers and staff, who then help to get better outcomes for our kids. Also, we need to continue to invest in our people. We're a people development business, so the way that we continue to invest in leadership and talent development is critical for us as a system moving forward. And then last, it speaks to our work together and how we continue to work to become a high-performing team so that we can leverage the resources that exist in our city. So many of these transition themes have guided the development of the priorities for this budget. In addition, since we've gotten these recommendations, we've been acting this year. So this is our story of action. This is what we've accomplished this year while we've been prioritizing the recommendations and pulling together a new strategic operating plan for the system. As you know, in December, we reorganized the central office to align with the needs that came out of the transition report. And we did this so that we could better support the needs of our schools and our students. We've been elevating our core business of teaching and learning and the importance of our school leaders to be instructional leaders and to focus on things that matter most for improving teaching and learning. I've been working closely with my leadership team to develop what I'm calling an acceleration agenda, an approach to support our schools and students with the greatest need by differentiating and targeting supports and resources. We've been deepening our implementation of student-centered learning, and in fact, we won a significant grant from the Nellie Mae Foundation to support these efforts over the next 3.5 years. We've been engaging in strategic planning and looking to strengthen our community engagement. We're seeing a decrease in suspensions. Right now, we have 600 fewer suspensions than we had last year, and we're also starting to see a decrease in chronic absenteeism. We've been increasing our compliance in special education, and we continue to invest in innovative and cutting-edge programming to serve our English language learners. So that's our list of accomplishments and how we've started to tackle some of the key recommendations from the transition report. Now, as we look ahead, though, part of the story of now is the story of a perfect storm. So as we look to align resources with our priorities and our vision for the future, we found 3 things colliding. We've had flat funding in our general funds for the past 8 years. And you know, when you have flat funds, you also have increasing costs. So it doesn't mean you can keep the same level of services, but you have to make cuts. But that's also combined with decreasing special funds. And you'll see in this year's budget that we have 11 million less in our special funds to work with. So it's not even flat funding, but a decrease this year as we look to allocate resources to our priorities and vision moving ahead. And last, we've been adding schools and programs over the same period of time. So we've been adding and adding in a time of decreasing funding. So that's the landscape that we face this year as we look to build the budget. It's also, I talk about, this isn't the capital improvement budget, of course, but part of this landscape too was in adding programs in schools was that we've added every year without being able to plan for permanent homes. And when I got here, I had 5 schools that are in temporary locations. So that adds to the stress in terms of finding resources to have adequate facilities for schools and just takes the time and energy and attention of our team and takes our focus away from teaching and learning. So again, this is what we faced when we looked to develop this budget this year, a perfect storm of decreasing revenue and additional programs that have accumulated and built up over time. So as we planned ahead, part of our work with this budget was to plan for sustainability, to find ways to continue to offer strong and creative and innovative services and programs to our kids, but to find a way to sustain these programs when we face decreasing revenues. And also to find a way to transform our system and to take it to the next level. So again, just to reiterate in a little bit more detail for this budget, the challenges that we faced, in addition to have decreasing revenue of $11 million, costs go up. We have contractual salary increases and other costs that increase, and that totaled $13 million this year. So all in told, we had a $24 million gap to close as we were developing this budget. And so while we want to continue to invest in new work and new programming that aligns to some of our new priorities, we're not going to be able to do it all in one year. We're going to have to phase it in over multiple years. And also, as you heard and you know, and what we learned from the transition report and our engagement with the community, our current system works for some students, and it needs to work for all students. And while we've seen great progress in the system over the years, for example, with graduation rates, while we did see a slight increase this year, we're starting to see these numbers plateau. And so we're going to need some new strategies to take us to the next level. And again, in order to serve all of our students. And also, this is a time where we're refocusing our priorities to focus on our core business of teaching and learning. And also, as we look to allocate resources to these new priorities, we have to think beyond money. So we look at our resources as, of course, our money, but also how we spend our time and how we leverage the talent of our people in the system, and also our facilities. So on the next page, I've laid out kind of our strategic focal points. You've been hearing me speak about these all year. Said as we're planning, these are 3 high leverage strategies that will continue to drive the work of the next, to take our system to the next level. So first of all, leadership. We continue to invest in our leaders and build leadership capacity at all levels of the system. I like to say you can't have a great school without a great leader. So this has been a key strategy for us as a school district. An investment in learning, starting with students, but also paying attention to adult learning and how we learn as a system, as an organization. And then last, I like to talk about this as knowing the stories of students and the stories of schools. It's really an approach to make sure that we know each and every student well, and we know each and every school well, and we're able to match our resources to the unique strengths and needs of each student and of each school. So these have been the overarching strategies that we've used, and we use these to focus our budget this year. And then to go down to one more level of detail, we've also been working on refocusing our priorities into 5 areas. Again, you've heard me say this over and over again, and this was a hard truth that came out of the transition report. We need to make sure we're focusing on our core business of teaching and learning. Another priority that guided the development of this budget is to decrease the variability of performance both within and across schools. We also continue to work to strengthen the academic experiences and the outcomes of our English language learners and our students with special needs. This is part of our all means all agenda. When we talk about all students, we mean all of them. We've looked to increase our operational effectiveness and efficiency. And last, we've looked in this budget to enhance our leadership development, professional learning, and talent management. Again, this responds to key recommendations that came out of the transition report, and these were the guiding priorities as we allocated our resources for next year. We're going to come back to that, and you'll see some of the specific ways that we've allocated dollars to these priorities later in the presentation. So next, how did we do it? What was the budget process? So first, it's laid out. We started in January. And what I want to highlight about the process is that we do this work with our school principals and our school governance councils. So they develop their budgets. We invite them then to come back in for a compliance meeting, so to make sure they're following all the special ed compliance rules, class size guidelines, things like that. And you'll see in that meeting, it's a team. Finance is at the meeting, the Office of Talent Management, our associate superintendents. We have representatives from special education, our intervention team, English language learner, early childhood. Again, school leaders are in that meeting. It's a collaborative process to develop the budget. So this is hand in hand, our central office team with our schools and our school governance councils. And then we're coming to you to give you the overview. And as I said before, we'll have time to work through the details with you over the coming weeks. We'll hold the public hearing on the 21st. We'll bring it to you for adoption May 5th, and then we'll take it to City Council in May. So again, that's a review of the process, but again, wanting to highlight for you that this is a collaborative process that we do with our principals and our school governance councils. On this next slide, I'm at progression of resources. So I see the screen is down, so if you're following along on the page. One of the things that we're proud of in this budget and that we maintain as a non-negotiable, even with the severe kind of cuts that we had to make this year, we still maintained our commitment that 80% of our funds would go out to schools and 19% is for central office. So the problem was the pie was smaller this year. So we still sent out 81% of it to schools, but schools had to make some tough choices. But we still remain committed to making sure that 81% of our funds are going out to our schools. So we were able to do that again this year in this budget. On the next page, you'll look at the proposed all funds, and that lays out for you my total proposed budget for this year. You'll see first that $284 million of that is the general budget, and that's the ECS funding that comes from the state, as well as the funding that we get from the city. Again, you'll note that this is flat. There's no increase. We recognize the fiscal challenges that the city is facing. Also, the state had a very difficult budget year. What makes it especially challenging for us, though, is that this is the 8th year of flat funding for the general budget. And then you'll see in special funds, these are things like federal grants. So for example, Title I funds that we get, we also get state grants, and also we do some fundraising. So we sometimes get grants from private foundations and other sources. We have a decrease there of $11 million, and some of that is, I'll point out some of the details in the executive summary and in your book. We've had a decrease in most of our federal funds, most of the state grants that we get. We also have had some one-time grants that expired. So we had a high school initiative grant, and that ended this year. So that contributes to some of the decrease. We also had a Gates grant that ended this year as well. So we have a total decrease of $11 million from our special funds. So overall, that means that my proposed budget is a decrease of 2.5% for this year, for a total of $429.3 million. Where does the money come from? So you'll see the breakdown here that 66% of the money is from the general budget, 33.9% from special funds. We've had to increase our reliance on special funds over the past 5 years. We've increased our reliance from 28% of the budget to now 33.4%, again, kind of contributing to our sustainability problem. We over-rely on special funds to fund our programming. And then you see the breakthrough of how much of the money comes from the state pass-through, from the city of Hartford, state grants, federal grants, and then private and foundation grants. That's the pie on the left. So that's where we get our revenue. On the next page, enrollment is an important part of this budget at both the district and at the school level. As you know, the enrollment tends to drive the amount of money that is allocated to schools as we use a student-based budgeting process. And also it impacts the money that we get from the state as well. And so the headline here is that we are projected to have an increase in enrollment, a total of 831 students, and that's 508 who will attend school in the city of Hartford. This enrollment breakdown totals all of the students, so the students who attend schools at inter-district magnet schools outside of the city or who go to open choice placements, as well as the students who attend schools in the city of Hartford. So we are projected to have an increase of 508 students in city as well. So again, part of the story, growing enrollment, less revenue. So the major drivers, these are the major categories that we break the budget into. And again, you'll just see at the top what the operating budget was last year. You see the proposed operating budget for this year with the $11 million decrease. So, where did we get that money from? You're seeing that most of the categories in the budget are seeing a net decrease. There are a few that have an increase, such as tuition, and this tuition line accounts for tuition that we pay for students that attend magnet schools outside of our system, special education students, and also with the Opportunity Academy proposal that you just approved, the tuition for those students. Also, the utility rates have gone up, so that's why you see the increase in the utilities line as well. And I'll walk you through some more of the increasing costs, because the total gap, as I told you, was not just the 11 million, but we have increasing costs of $13 million. So we had salary increases. We contributed more to the MHIS infrastructure that was part of the E-rate funding that you supported over the past couple of months. We have had some increases with building maintenance. That was part of our strategy to centralize our custodial services and our security staff. That was a key recommendation from the transition report, to provide more equitable services to maintain our buildings, and also to help our leaders focus on instructional leadership, to take some of the operational work off their plate, but we needed to invest a little bit more as we were doing that work. Student transportation, a slight contractual increase, the tuition we've talked about already, and utilities, and then there was an increase in fringe benefits. So I just wanted to paint the whole picture for you to see that it wasn't just the 11 million in decreasing revenue that we had to account for, but we also had to reallocate and find ways to account for the increased costs that we had in this budget as well. So that's the breakdown of the increasing costs in the budget. So how'd we do it? How'd we close the $24 million gap? You see on this page our mitigation strategies. So we've been able to reduce our salaries this way. So we've reduced our allocation for part-time, overtime. There's been some attrition, so we picked up about $1 million in savings there. And we reduced 78.2 positions across the system to save $5 million in the salary line. We've reduced our reliance on professional contracts and services to save nearly $2 million. We've realized some savings with fringe and insurance because of increased contributions from our employees. And then also the last is really just reductions and efficiencies. And when you look at the detail, you'll see cuts really in almost every category. So really just trying to save where we could to contribute to that $11 million in savings. So that's how we were able to close the gap. The next slide talks about the staff impact. So we had to cut 78.2 positions overall. You'll see 65.5 of those positions are school-based. That's about 2% of the total staff that serves schools. And in central office, you'll see that we cut nearly 13 positions. That's about 3.4% of the staff in central office, but I also want to point out something else. Some of the central office staff actually support schools. For example, school psychologists, speech and language. They're not sitting in central office working. They're out in schools, and we still have those positions accounted for in central office. When you really look at the number of central office people who are at central office and not supporting out in schools on a daily basis, it's about 140 positions. So these cuts represent almost, and these cuts all come from that category. So these cuts represent about 10% of the central service staff. It was important to us as much as possible to protect the classroom. So we really looked to minimize the impact on teaching positions. So while we have a reduction of 36 teachers, we're hopeful that we will avoid layoffs. We tend to hire about 200 teachers per year. So we're hopeful in that regard, that despite these cuts, we'll be able to minimize that impact. We also, besides closing the gap, that's not all we tried to do with this budget. We really were looking to invest in our future and align these resources to where we want to go as a school system and to our priorities. So in terms of focusing in on our core business of teaching and learning, another key recommendation that we learned from the transition report was the need to fill in some curriculum gaps. So we allocated dollars to that, to building out our curriculum. We also were able to, as I just mentioned, try to minimize the impact on classrooms. We've been able to maintain small class sizes, and we also have been able to minimize the teacher position cuts. In terms of looking to decrease variability of performance within and across schools, I told you we've been building out an acceleration agenda. So we've been learning from our schools what kind of support they need to accelerate student progress. So we've built out a plan to support schools at the principal and school level, at the teacher team level, and at the individualized student level, and have matched some resources to do that work. So we've set aside some money to pay for that new partnership and to learn a new way of doing business to help accelerate performance in our schools. In terms of supporting our English language learners and students with special needs, we're continuing to invest in innovative programming. We have a great partnership with Middlebury College. And we also have been part of an I3 grant. It's LASERS, called LASERS is the acronym, and it's serving our youngest English language learners. And it's a very creative partnership that involves the Connecticut Science Center, the Educational Development Corporation out of Massachusetts, and others. So we're excited to be on the cutting edge, and we wanted to continue to invest in these programs for our English language learners. Special education, you see, like many other districts, we face the rising cost of paying tuition for students to be in outside placements, and we really want to take a look to see if we're optimizing our resources. Are there ways we could build out more programs in the school system? So I asked that we set aside some money to do a special education audit to see if we can realize more savings and we can optimize and continue to build more robust programming for our students with special needs. So I've set aside some money to do that for next year. In terms of increasing operational effectiveness and efficiency, as I mentioned, we centralized custodial and security staff as one of the key recommendations we're addressing. We also are investing in the E-rate match for technology infrastructure. And then we've also been trying to find creative solutions to sustain and strengthen the services of our smallest schools. Again, as we learned in the transition report, it is very difficult to sustain schools with our student-based budgeting formula. It doesn't work for schools that are below 350 students. And so we still have been able to find ways to subsidize more small schools in this budget and to try to find other ways to sustain programs and schools that are important to us, even though they're below that threshold of what our normal budgeting process can support. And then our commitment to enhancing leadership development and professional learning. We have allocated much of our Alliance grant to support these areas, in addition to supporting intervention of individual students and schools. We took that knowing stories of schools and students approach when we allocated the funds for our Alliance grant, as well as continue to support key leadership development and professional development initiatives. So again, we didn't just make cuts, we also looked for ways to invest in the future. Although we would really like to accelerate it and do much more. What it really would cost us if we wanted to truly invest in our future next year in a quick way. We've had to break it down and say we're going to phase this in over the next few years. But if we really wanted to accomplish what we're setting out to do, it would cost $21 million additional dollars, and that includes increasing funding for neighborhood schools, and it's not even giving neighborhood schools more per pupil at that point. It's just to get neighborhood schools up to the average per pupil spending for magnet schools, $10,800 per student, to make sure neighborhood schools were funded at least at that per pupil expenditure. It would cost us an additional $12 million to get there. The facilities repairs, we're not able to do some key facilities repairs that we need to in our neighborhood schools. Some more funding for professional learning to support our acceleration agenda, and also curriculum rollout needs professional support or learning support around that. When we were centralizing our custodial services, our team looked at industry standards and said, to do this right, to cover the square footage of our buildings, we'll need 18 additional custodians. We said, sorry guys, we just can't get there this year. So we've been able to put in place 6 additional custodians, and we'll have to take in the approach again of phasing in to get up to that industry standard over the next couple of years. But that's what it would cost if we gave the team what they feel they needed to meet the industry standard for caring for our schools. Curriculum gaps, again, we know it would cost this much to cover what we needed. We're able to allocate about 1/3 of that this year to address curriculum gaps, so we're having to phase that in over time. and then to continue to grow our principal pipeline, which has recently been recognized as a very innovative approach. We need about $1 million more to do that as well. So this is the dream. This is what it really would take to implement our acceleration agenda in an accelerated manner. But what we're having to do is to break it down and start to do that in a phased-in approach. And so lastly, just to summarize, this is what we've been able to do with this budget. We have been able to close our gap of $24 million. We've been able to start to refocus on our priorities, and especially our core business of teaching and learning. But we're going to have to do it in phases, in a phased-in approach, so that we can meet my mantra, my vision of making sure that every student thrives and every school is high performing. So with that, that's the overview. We'll open it up for questions. I don't expect you to know every level of detail at this point tonight. It was just to kind of let you hear from me, the big components of the budget and what we tried to do this year. You have the budget book in front of you that includes an executive summary. It has the detailed pages for every school and for every office. So we certainly would welcome any of your feedback or questions now, but also know you'll have other opportunities to dig in, to dialogue with us, to ask questions, submit them to us, and we'll work with you to continue to have conversations around the budget. So thank you for listening.
Are there questions for the superintendent, Mr. Noel Sullivan?
The enrollment increase of 831, is that Hartford residents or is that Hartford and suburban?
So that's the increase is Hartford residents only. When you look at the entire just 27,000, it includes the suburban residents that attend school here, Hartford residents, and then Hartford residents that attend school outside of the system as well.
Questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Dr. Best?
I want to thank you for the presentation. It was very helpful to hear how the vision of what we're trying to do and how it lines up with the funds and the limited funds that we're facing. One of my questions is, when it comes to decreasing suspensions and chronic absenteeism, are there funds that are being set aside to achieve that goal, since it is something very important in our school system? And
Yes.
Where would those show up?
Thank you for asking for that. They are here. We did set aside an additional 100,000 this year that we're able to continue next year. What we've done with that 100,000 is we've hired 2 case managers that are helping to do to support schools with some of the greatest needs in these areas, and we've built out a team. So we've been able to continue that investment next year.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I have another question about the proposed layoffs. I know that it's heartbreaking to see that we're facing the possibility of teacher layoffs. I know that when it comes to working in certain systems, it's very challenging to lay off certain people. If you've been in the system a long time and you have seniority, oftentimes people wouldn't even dare think even possibly about a senior person. But sometimes we have people that have been in the system a long time and they are experiencing chronic absenteeism, because I know that our data shows that we have a number of teachers that are chronically absent as well. I'm wondering, have there been collaborative efforts put forth where the union might be working with the administration to look at creative ways of saving people that might be the highest producers versus just saving people based on seniority? Is there some collaborative work going on so it doesn't turn into a war based on tradition?
Yeah, first I just want to say we're hopeful that we'll avoid layoffs. I can't promise there won't be any. There might be a specialized position here or there where we might not be able to match somebody to that opening, or they don't have the certification, but we typically hire around 200 teachers a year, and we're looking at 36 reductions in teacher positions. And then I know there are other types of positions here as well, but we're hopeful that people will be able to land positions again, except in specialized cases. So just wanted to lay that out, because that's one of the very hopeful positive things, kind of one of the miracles in this budget, that despite the challenges, that it looks like we'll be able to avoid a lot of layoffs. And right now we have to follow contractual guidelines when we look at having to face layoffs. So that's our current practice for working with the union around that, following contractual procedures with, correct me if I'm wrong, really follows a seniority-based process.
It's not something that the union has been open to.
Yes, I
It's
do.
something we pursued in the past. It has not been welcome.
And I understand that it wouldn't be welcome, but I think that we're facing a really critical time period where we have to look at creative solutions. And I appreciate the work that's been going on with talent management. And sometimes you have talent that needs to be managed. And it's a sacred cow, but the ship is going down in some ways. And we might have to look at some of our sacred cows in order for the whole system to thrive. And I'm wondering, how can we start to open some new conversations on subjects we act as if we can never talk about it again, because we've been failing a very long time, and we have to start shifting money. And we all know, and my brother was a school teacher for 35 years, we all know there are those that have lost inspiration along the way, and we know that there might be some that are highly inspired. So how can we work together to look at the sacred cows in our system that we keep funding? Because that's part of why we're going down. So how can we have new conversations? And my chairperson has that smile like, you're really blowing it, nobody's gonna like you.
No,
All right, no.
no, not at all. I mean, the former, no, the latter is probably true.
Okay.
Yeah. No, hold on. It's a fair question, Dr. Bess. It's a fair question, but it's obviously, it is a subject of great sensitivity that is not easily approached, and the cost of approaching is often quite high. So I mean, we can look at it, but it would require our partners, frankly, in the HFT and the other unions, to fundamentally change sort of their bargaining position, which does not seem likely, just based on the fact that people typically don't radically change their bargaining positions on any issues over in a short period of time. I mean, maybe with exigent circumstances, and we could certainly approach them, but I would not lay down a significant bet on that unless I was receiving good odds.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
as the resident minister
Yeah.
on the Board of Education,
prayer would be appreciated.
prayer is a big factor here, and it's free. And I think that we're at a place, especially with flat funding for 8 years, we cannot keep cutting, and we've got some big issues, which really does always lie in personnel. That's the big ticket item. How can we at least have a conversation without it being a war? And I think we have to actually address the sacred cow, which is we have to creatively look at personnel costs without just saying, let's follow what we always do, just cut based on this, when really maybe there's another way of looking at it. Instead of just keeping the tradition, keep the best and brightest talent. Is that a possibility that we could keep the best and brightest teachers irregardless of seniority? I said it out loud.
I mean, I would just say, your point is well taken in that this kind of budget landscape is requiring us to look at different ways of doing the work in many ways, in many aspects.
So is there a way that we might be able to open the door of conversation for creative solution seeking versus going to war? How do we do that? Instead of doing the same old thing, how do we open a new conversation and maybe work together? We talk about collaboration and partnership. How could we better partner with the union instead of going against automatically?
No, I'm hopeful about that. I think we both agree that collaboration is important to us, and we've been really working toward that this year. So I'm hopeful about it.
Thank you.
And in the meantime, I think Philippians 4:13 is probably.
Okay. See, your mother will be so proud, Mr. Chairman.
Probably in order. Any other questions? Mr. Noel Sullivan, then Mr. Brusha. He had his hand up.
The increase in interdistrict choice of 323, is that, like, how do we get that number? Is that asking them and they give us that number back?
Yeah, that's a projection based on what we think the availability of seats are.
Okay.
in the inter-district choice schools.
All right, and so then my bigger question is that 831, how accurate do we expect that to be? Do we actually expect that to happen, or do we think that there might be some change in that?
So I think for choice and inter-district, if I had to give you my best guess forward, I think that number might be a little low. I think, especially given the recent chef negotiations that opened 1,000 more seats, so there might be more than 323. But I think we have attractive options here in Hartford. So I'm hopeful that we'll be able to retain a lot of our students within our schools. In terms of our host magnet schools and our neighborhood schools, I'm confident, fairly confident that those numbers will hold true based on what we see so far in the application pools in our own lotteries for our schools.
And just if I may, I meant to acknowledge our CFO, Paula Altieri, and her team. You see Joanna Brown next to her and the hard work that they did, their entire team, to put this budget together, as well as the hard work of our principals and school governance councils. But just really want to acknowledge our top-notch financial team. Thank you.
Are you all set, Peter?
Yeah.
Mr. Brascia?
I have a question about I understand that the budget is difficult. I understand that money is short.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you look at some of the statistics or some of the items here, the question I have is, now how many teachers, classroom teachers, who have students will be eliminated? Over here it says something like 36.
Yeah.
Right. 36 teachers, and yet we're looking for smaller classes. Isn't that like...
We're able to maintain our small class sizes. We'll get you the breakdown. Not all of the 36 are classroom teachers. I know some of them were teachers that were in the student success centers, so we can get you a more detailed breakdown, but not all 36 that you see are classroom teachers.
Because they were combined with all the others under the title of the schools.
Right.
Yeah. So. And then I see that, like, I'm curious at the amount of money that would be spent like in schools alone, as opposed to central office, because the central office person generally makes a lot more than teachers.
So it's 81% of the total budget. Paula has the exact page in the big budget book for you where you can see that breakdown. So just looking it up for you, we'll give you that exact total.
So if you look on actually page 12 and 13 in the budget book, it actually gives you the breakdown for what we project to be spent in schools versus central office. So of our total $429.3 million budget, we're expecting to spend $348.5 million at the schools and $80.9 million in central services. Now, when we talk about central services, I want to echo what Dr. Narvez said earlier. Central services consists of more than just central office. So you can actually see what the breakdown is on page 13 of everything that's classified in that central service. You're going to see things like language, speech, hearing, health services, student transportation, which all falls under that, which really isn't a central office cost.
I just think that even with the budget problem, sending home half the Army and keeping the generals does not seem to me to be effective. Now, I'm not criticizing this. I'm just bringing a point up in terms of allocation of resources. It seems that the first thing that goes in the past was the teachers and the support staff. And the last one, when my principal or so, or a combination of principals and deans, or at that time vice principals. So
Just if I could respond to that, because we were very aware of that in the budget development process, and just two things I just want to highlight and reiterate again. You know, even though we had less money, we still kept to the guidelines that 81% of that funding was going out to schools. We weren't going to keep more, a higher percentage for central office. And the second thing I'll point out again is with the position cuts. The central office position cuts represent about 10% of the central office staff, and the school-based cuts represent about 2% of the school-based positions. So we were very aware of the point you're making, and we're intentional in making sure that central office took a higher percentage of the cuts and also didn't take more of the allocation.
Further questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Dr. Taylor?
I have just a quick question. You referenced it earlier about some of the potential loss in teacher positions, and you mentioned that 29 of them would be coming from the student success centers. And I just wondered if you could explain that a little bit more, what positions those are and what kind of impact that has and how you'll mitigate that loss.
Yeah, that these positions were funded by the High School Initiative Grant. This was the last year of that. And so some of that we've been planning for the transition. We've been building capacity with other staff to be able to take on some of these positions. And I spoke with Sonia Denal, I see she's in the office, in the audience, our Executive Director of College and Career Readiness, and she's doing transition planning with the schools so that we can make sure that we can continue some of those services even though we're losing positions. Again, we knew it would happen, but they were grant-funded positions, and so we're having to plan for that transition.
That's helpful to know. Thank you.
Further questions? Oh, Mr. Noel Sullivan, then Mr. Cotto. He's quick with his hand.
Going to like the school by school breakdown, why is it that some schools, for instance, Montessori at Moylan, that's increasing their enrollment by 42 students, are having their budget reduced, while other schools aren't? Like, how was it decided which?
It depends on the school. So in that case, you'll see a reduction of incubation funding. That was part of this year's budget, and then part of the growth was that they're adding more students. That was planned as well. So it's a little bit of a different story for each school, but in that case, that's what happened. The incubation funding for the building, that was last year, one time. It's not carrying over this year, but we also knew that they were going to grow. And again, Paula, correct me if I'm misstating that, but really you have to go on a case by case, school by school basis.
Correct. So what we see is there's a lot of growth in the magnets through the application pools. Some are growing grades, right, which have been intentional. They're adding maybe their 12th grade or their 6th grade or whatever as they're growing as a school. And some of these schools that are still growing enrollment, like you mentioned, TJ, that Montessori Moylan has gone down by 4.5 million, but is growing 42 students. And Dr. Narvez is absolutely correct on that, is they lost one-time chef incubation funds that was meant for them to buy facilities or do acquisitions, new computers or furniture and things like that. That was meant to be a one-time for that program expansion as part of the chef agreement.
So it's more like special funds and things.
Correct, correct. The majority of when we talk about chef funding that's coming in, that's all special funds.
By and
That's how
large,
that
you'll
comes in.
notice when you look at the school page, most schools made cuts except for, and then with rare exceptions to that, schools that had planned growth. So the Betances STEM is growing a grade. Montessori at Moylan is growing a grade. Global, it's our most to the neighborhood school, is growing a grade. And so that's where you see the ads again, with few exceptions. You also see some additional resources for some of the small schools as well as a result of the subsidies. But by and large, you see reductions almost across the board.
Thank you.
Mr. Cotto.
Just a few questions. First of all, be helpful to see what precisely are the cuts to special funds. I mean, I'd be interested in seeing what grants. I don't know if that's in there or not.
It absolutely is. We'll get you the page.
Okay, is it in the big book or the little presentation?
It's in the executive summary.
Yes, it's in the,
Okay,
it's on page 15.
okay, I'll
Mr.
write
Cotto.
that down. Thank you.
Again, you see almost every special fund took a hit, but it's laid out in detail.
Okay. All right, and I hadn't had a chance to look at this because I just got it, but
Right.
so I'll have to respond later to some of the details. But I'm curious as to what extent we've been able to move more towards like New Haven's trying to do kind of a real budget in terms of showing actual costs, and I'm wondering if we've been able to kind of make any headway in that regard.
So
So I guess I'll give,
Just not sure
just to
what you
give,
mean
sorry,
by
I'll give
real-
some background.
real
So,
costs.
in the years past, I've asked for real actual costs, as folks from the audience and certainly finance understands. The numbers here are not real numbers all the time. They're actually, they're student-based budget numbers. There's actually two ways of accounting here. So the number you see here may not be an actual dollar cost that's going to the program. It's an unusual way of doing budgeting, but it's a way that's been invented by our school system. In New Haven, from what I understand, they have each school has a page, and they're trying to go more towards actual cost of what that program costs and how it all kind of works. So I'm just curious if we've made any headway on that stuff.
if I may?
Yep, please.
So the conversation in previous years, Robert, has been the actual versus average salary conversation. So I don't want to have our audience here thinking that these are not based on actual cost. So when we talk about average salary, it's average salary in general fund, actual salary in special funds. Plus this budget has a whole bunch of non-salary accounts that have nothing to do with the average salary conversation. So on the average salary conversation, we have had discussions of moving to whether we're going to budget for actuals. But one of the things that we've talked about and debated is that we don't want schools to be penalized by having to pay for teachers. So one of the things that we're doing in the leadership pipeline is we're trying to incentivize our highly qualified staff to go into some of our hardest assignments. Basically, what you would do is you would drive some of the higher costs to some of those low-performing schools. So what we've done as a district and as a former board, authorized the use of average salaries. So they said a teacher would be a teacher regardless as to what school they went to. So no school would have to determine what they could accept for a teacher based on what that teacher costs. So we wanted to be, they could accept any teacher and not be driven by cost. So that's why this district moved to an average instead of actual salary. And we've talked and debated about whether we were moving back to average salary. That was something that we looked at in the transition reports. You know, we've looked at this in the past to see how close we are on if there's huge discrepancies between the average and the actual. We've actually posted that the last 2 years to the website so everybody can see the discrepancy. And we're talking the discrepancies have been very, very small. They've been anywhere from 20 to max maybe 50,000 have been some of the disparities. So I don't want us to leave here thinking that this is not a true budget representing actual costs, because it is.
Not at the school level, though. It's not the actual number at the school level. At the district level, it is a real number, but at this individual school level, this budget book does not provide an actual dollar cost. It's based on an average salary. It's a virtual budget in some ways at the school level.
It's a budget, and I mean, a budget is built on best guess boards, assumptions. So, you know, we can take a look at that. So, I mean, that's what we've done for year after year in the financials is we've posted how close our budgeting average salary is to the actual salary experience at those schools. And as I mentioned, they're within 1% to 2%, Robert. So we're not talking significant variances.
So if it's not
school to school.
If it's not significant, then why can we not just put the actual dollar cost at every school of every employee and of every school? Why don't we just do that if there's not a big discrepancy?
I mean, that is a decision that we can make as an administration as to if we would like to move to that.
Again, I think what the point that Ms. Altieri made was a good one as we're looking to increase our ability to do more strategic staffing and to match staff with school strengths and needs. Sometimes it's a disincentive to do that, but absolutely, we continue to take a look at our budgeting practices and processes, and again, it was raised as part of the transition report, so we will take a look at it, but we don't want to provide the wrong kinds of incentives to school when it comes to staffing.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, so I guess the answer to my question is no, we're not moving any further closer to the actual budget. And I think, I think what I'm getting at is this idea that, on paper, we're saying each individual school gets a certain amount of money per kid, but it doesn't quite work like that. So I guess from a public transparency perspective, I think it's important to see what we're actually spending in each school to get a sense of, are there discrepancies and are there distortions? Do some schools get more than others? I think that's where I'm coming from. So, I hope to I'll take a look at the website and see what you've put up in previous years to see, because I think it's important, because on the one hand, I understand that you're trying to create a fix to finance school choice. And on the other hand, we're kind of offering this illusion of equity that may not exactly exist. So that's what I'm getting at.
So we know you just got the budget book, but certainly, each school's budget is laid out, and also as part of the process, they pointed out that, principals and school governance councils are part of the process too, in an effort to make the budget a very transparent process, so.
Mr. Chairman?
Are you all set, Robert?
Yeah, thank you.
Dr. Beth?
I have a question along those lines. I noticed that when in the package, you say that we're refocusing our priorities, and it says decrease variability of performance within and across schools. The phrase sounds good at first, but I wanted a little bit more clarification of what does that mean, especially economically? And it goes back to that funding based on per child. Some of the schools may not actually be getting the same amount of funding given what their needs are, and I'm wondering, how are we actually doing that, and what does that mean?
This was one of the ways we're starting to do that is not just in terms of funding, but in terms of how we're supporting schools with leadership and instructional practices. So you heard me refer to an acceleration agenda and how we're looking to support schools in different ways at 3 different levels: at the principal level, at the teacher team level, and at the individualized student level. And so we've been working all year to build out what those appropriate resources and partnerships would look like. And so the money that we've set aside to do that will help us to fund those partnerships and times to work with teacher teams around professional learning. So that's what we mean by that, by really building out new leadership and instructional practices to help accelerate student performance at schools.
And I asked the question because in our strategic planning session, there was that visual that we all had of equality versus equity.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I think about some of our neighborhood schools that have so little to work with, and I think about the passion of parents when it comes to, maybe they were trying to get their child in the magnet school and they ended up back in the neighborhood school. Are we funding equally, or are we trying to create equity? I'm wondering, what are we doing? And if we're still funding by the child, then that means we're not providing the same learning experience based on funding, because some of our neighborhood schools actually need a lot more than the brand new sparkling clean magnet schools.
I really appreciate the question and the point about equity versus equality. And I'll tell you a couple of ways that we try to achieve that. And then also you saw I laid out in what it would really take to achieve our vision. We're not able to fully do that, but what we try to do to be equitable in our distribution of resources is a couple of things. So with the student-based budgeting, there are weights. So English language learners, students with special needs, students who require additional academic assistance get more allocated to them. So that's one way that we try to give more to those who need more. But on top of that, we realize that student-based budgeting isn't always enough. So in some of the smaller schools, we've had to put money on top of that. In addition to some of our schools with the greatest needs, when we look at things like alliance funds and other grants like that, we give those to our schools that really need to accelerate progress. So it's not everything. We would need an additional $12 million to even get neighborhood schools up to the, some schools, neighborhood schools are above it. Some are not, but to get to that average 10.8 of per pupil spending for magnet schools. So we do try to do it with our limited resources. We're not where we want to be with that.
Thank you. And then the other thing I was wondering about is, I understand there's a certain formula that we can't afford to have smaller schools. And so what does that mean? Why are we starting to co-locate schools based on this funding issue? And what is the bar of how many students you need in a school in order for it to be a go? Because I'm understanding that the business model we were operating in before was flawed because economically we cannot afford all the individual little schools.
Yeah.
So could you explain that for us a little bit more?
I'll start and then Paula, please add where I've left out details. So what we found when we undertook the study in the transition report was when our schools smaller than 350 students, our student-based budgeting model was it's not enough, right? It doesn't meet the threshold that you need to give resources to support a school. And so what you've seen here is that we've had to subsidize schools at that level. So again, we do the student-based budgeting, the entitlement funds, the Alliance grant, and so it's a hybrid, right? We're not using a pure student-based budgeting system. You see here with two of our very smallest schools, Renzulli is a 90-student school, and with Opportunity High School, they are important to us. So we had to find creative ways to sustain and strengthen those services to our students. So the Opportunity High School proposal that you just approved was one way to continue to provide those services to students. But I mean, we couldn't sustain funding at $30,000 per student. And the co-location with Renzulli Academy, again, also is a way to continue to strengthen and sustain that important school by allowing them to keep some core teachers while also sharing some resources with the Rawson School. So those were the very smallest schools, and we're trying to find creative ways to sustain them. But then with other schools, we're having to provide subsidies, and we're going to have to look at sustainability over time as well. But 350 is the number.
350 is the number. So one of my final questions to that end is, I wasn't here that long, so I don't know how new schools got started up, and is there a limit to the number of schools we can afford in our city? Because it seems like we have sort of a whole range of schools showing up. How many can we actually afford? Is there being a study done of how much the city can afford for schools? And that might mean the hard decision-making of closing some schools because we cannot afford to support. What's the number in Hartford? Or is there a study being done to kind of tell us what we really can afford versus what we really would like? If 350 is the number.
We have to take a look at that, and we've started to in a couple of different ways. So we've done a facilities study this year to look at the conditions of our facilities. We're going to present the results of that study to you very soon. We're kind of finalizing the work with the contractor. But the next level of work on that is then to look at capacity and enrollment projections, and then to see what we can sustain. The other way we've been trying to tackle it is with chef negotiations this year. You saw this one-year agreement was a way just to sustain. We didn't add programs or schools. It was a way to go back to promises that had been made in terms of buildings and seats. So that was one way to try to stabilize and not add additional programs and schools without having that long-term plan of what we really could sustain in the future.
And then my last question is, we have some schools that have had deferred maintenance for decades. And the cost of getting them to the place of being functional probably exceeds our budget.
Yeah.
So how are we dealing with that reality that some of our schools, we will never have enough money to bring it up to code even? So what will we do about that, and what's the plan?
It's a tough one. Again, you're going to see that cost when we present the facilities condition study for you. And so they've gone to every building and estimated the cost of what it would take to get all of the buildings up to snuff. And then there's a way that you can manipulate that database to say, so if you have this allocation this year, you can tackle this much of the list. And if you had this much money this year, you can bite off this part of the list. So that will inform the work. Also, the centralizing custodial services, again, is, a way to get there. Again, we're able to do a third of what we need to as part of maintenance. It's certainly not all of it. We were able to increase a little bit this year, but certainly not what we need.
Thank you.
Yes, for the chairman, just a couple of things. Thank you for very thorough and all this really transparent information. On the staff impact on page 17 that you have in your, on the handout, if you compare that to page 18 on your workbook, there is a discrepancy in, where's the page 18? You have just two, I think that you change the career specialist versus the recruitment specialist. So one is 4.5, there was 3 in the booklet. It changes, it's different. So just to make sure to know which one is which. Is this one versus this, what we got today. So just look into that, Paula.
Oh, yeah, I see it.
Okay, so just to make sure
The
that we know
4.5 to
exactly,
3.5, yep.
right, so which is what?
Thank you for pointing that out.
Sure, Dr. Narvaez. Also, what will be very interesting and at least beneficial for the board and for some of us in particular is to know out of the staff impact, what is the impact on neighborhood schools versus non-neighborhood schools? I would like to see that. I would like to really see what we're doing in terms of, all of these positions and how they carry an impact within both categories.
Absolutely. It's in more detail in your budget book. There's a page that lays out every single school and all the changes in the FTEs. So you'll be able to look school by school and not just the page school by school. There is a summary of it. Paula, do you know where that is, where we lay out the whole list of schools and then their impact? Dr. Cologne Rivas is wanting to see the impact on kind of neighborhood and magnet
Yes,
schools.
it's on page 12 and 13 is the cost center summary across. And then if you wanted to look at each individual school, every individual school has a staffing page and a financial page that ties back to this summary page.
Okay, very good. And then I know that this is not the process that we have used in the city of Hartford in terms of student performance that has a huge correlation with the budget. But for every single page that I see the student performance table, I will be very curious to know exactly where we put in our resources in those areas that are going from 2012 to 13 on a 20% and 13 to 14 to a 9%. So what are we doing within the budget to support those areas that actually correlate, Dr. Narvaez, with all the different areas that you point out here that you want to increase?
Exactly.
So I know it's a different exercise rather than it's not what we presented in this particular book, and it's not the way that we have presented it in previous years. But I believe that I'm truly advocating for us to take a closer look at that in terms of numbers, budget, money versus the performance. I mean, what are we doing with those areas that are not carrying the performance that should be carrying?
Absolutely. It's the right thing to advocate for. And what I didn't point out, or what I forgot to point out when I was talking about being the year of transition, in addition to new leadership, it's also, as you know, a transition in terms of student performance measures. So traditionally, those measures, they're old because they were the CMT testing. So, as we transition into SBAC and other ways of measuring performance, absolutely, we want to show you where we're investing our dollars and why that's a good investment. So yes, thank you for advocating for that for future budgets.
So thank you.
Yeah. Is there anything else? Anything else down here? All right, the chair would like to thank Dr. Narvaez and Ms. Altieri in the finance department. If you sit on the finance committee, you know how much work they do every year to put this together. This is a particularly grim year, and it may be the first of several given our financial situation. And I know this wasn't easy for the finance department particularly because they were the bearers of almost entirely bad news in every conversation they had with anybody in any school. So I appreciate their loyalty and their fortitude and their resilience, because I know this was not an easy cycle for them, and it's not an easy cycle for anybody, but particularly to be the bearer of extremely bad tidings. So with that, the chair will adjourn the meeting, and we'll come back in 2 weeks for the public hearing. If you have questions, I'd encourage you to ask them directly to Paula or to Beth if you want to copy me on it. I would hope Mr. Stallings could call a finance committee meeting, even if it's a special meeting.
There's one scheduled.
Okay. And, we could hash some of this out there and,
Absolutely.
and like I said, if there are issues, please, ask the questions. And if you want to have meetings, make the call and have the meeting. I don't need to be there for all of that. But with that, the chair will accept the motion to adjourn. Is there one?
So moved.
Been moved?
Second.
Seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Against? Adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.